What is up, Zelda and RPG fans? In this video, I'll be ranking all of the dungeons in both Oracle Ages and Oracle Seasons in one tier list. I already did both the other ones beforehand, and those ones I'll go more in depth than in this video. This is more of kind of a finale to those videos. So if you haven't checked those out yet, probably go watch those because this is going to be a more snappy, quick-paced video. Or if you just like snappy and quick-paced videos and just kind of want to see a quicker ranking, yep, just stay here for this one. So yeah, a lot of people consider these to be kind of like one huge game, and in my opinion, if you count this as one huge game, it's probably my favorite Zelda game. So yeah, I love Oracle Ages and Oracle Seasons, and they're very underappreciated, under talked about. So yeah, I'll be including not only the, I think the 8 dungeons. Is it 8 or 9? Going crazy. 8 dungeons. Yes, 8 dungeons. Then the heroes' caves from each game, the final dungeons from each game, and then the Room of Rites. So it'll be 21 total dungeons that we've got here. And I'm going to go in order. So I'm going to do the first dungeon of Ages and the first dungeon of Seasons and the second dungeon, blah, 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 blah. Then we've got the heroes' caves right here. Heroes' caves right here, final dungeons here, and then the Room of Rites, the final dungeon. All right. Anyway, let's get right into this with the Spirit's Grave, which is going to go in the D tier. It's an alright first dungeon for Oracle Ages, has a cool aesthetic, but personally I find that the trek to the dungeon is more interesting than the dungeon itself. You get the power bracelet here, which I always think sucks as a dungeon item for a place, because throwing pots does not make a dungeon fun. I'm sorry, but that's not really how it works for me. So you know what? I think this is a pretty mid dungeon. The dungeon bosses are pretty cute and fun. They are ghost themed. But the themes of the bosses themselves aren't even that special. But the cuteness of the mini boss and the boss are not nearly enough to carry this any higher than the D tier. But it is enough to carry it over the first level of the good old Oracle of Seasons, the Gnarled Root Dungeon, which is going straight in the E tier. It's the same idea as the last one, but instead we get Ember Seeds, which are somehow even less interesting than the Power Bracelet, because seeds in the Oracle Ages and Oracle Seasons are more used for occasional purposes throughout the game and are more overworld things. So having a dungeon where all you have to do is occasionally light some torches, yeah, that sucks. So yeah, it's not a very interesting dungeon. Both of the bosses are literally just copy and pasted with new sprites from the original Zelda 1, except they're easier than the original Zelda 1. So here we just have a game where the dungeon where it all feels derivative with a bad dungeon item, meaning that this is a very mediocre Zelda dungeon. But don't worry, these two games have some of my favorite dungeons in the series. Just the earlier dungeons of Zelda games typically fall in the C, D, or E for me. Not always, but typically. Alright, anyway, let's move into the next dungeon on this list. The second dungeon of Oracle of Ages, which is going to be the Wing Dungeon. And the Wing Dungeon actually kind of slaps, so I'm going to put that in the A tier. The Wing Dungeon just is a great use of the Rock's Feather. I think it is a significantly better use of the Rock's Feather than the Rock Feather Dungeon in Oracle Seasons, which is the Poison Moth Dungeon. What's cool about this is it's not just flying around, jumping over spikes occasionally and stuff like in that one. No, there's a bunch of puzzles, color puzzles that have to do with the Rock's Feathers. There's better boss fights, and there is a good old some good platforming segments. The 2D platforming stuff, I always love that about the Oracle games and Link's Awakening. So yeah, that was good here. This is a perfect introduction of the Rock's Feather. So yeah, that is great. Yeah, so we have got Wing Dungeon. Yep, great Rock's Feather Dungeon. All right, next, the third dungeon of Oracle of Seasons. third dungeon? No, sorry, the second dungeon. I knew I was throwing myself off. The second dungeon, Snake's Remains, just going to go in the C tier. Again, this is like the Spirit's Grave, where it is a power bracelet dungeon. However, there are some things here that I do thoroughly enjoy over the Spirit's Grave. The design itself is much more interesting. The Snake's Remains, it's a much bigger dungeon, and has a great iteration of Dodongo, perhaps one of my favorite iterations of Dodongo of the whole series, because you don't just throw bombs in his mouth, you have to throw bombs in his mouth so he's like stunned, and then you have to pick him up with the power bracelet and throw him into the middle of the room where there's a bunch of spikes. So I kind of like that iteration of Dodongo, and overall it's a pretty good dungeon. It is definitely a step up from the Spirit's Grave, not quite as good aesthetically, but it is way better of a power bracelet dungeon. I mean, it's still going to be in the C tier because it's a power bracelet dungeon. But yeah, it's pretty good. I wish there was a little bit less pot throwing, but you know, yeah, it's a pretty decent dungeon. All right, next is going to be the third dungeon of Oracle of Ages, which is going to be whatever the frick it is called, the Moonlit Grotto, which is going to go in the B tier. Moonlit Grotto is pretty decent. It's nothing too special. The item here is frick. What is the item here? Whew, what is the item? See, this is not a good case when I can't even remember what item you get here. Oh gosh. Item come to my head. Is it the hook? Time for me to look it up. I have to look it up. I literally made an Oracle Ages video with the Moonlit Grotto in it like an hour ago, and I can't even remember. So, first of all, that is part of why it's in B tier. It's a bit more forgettable of a dungeon, I will say, but it's not memorable in a bad way like the C and D tier dungeons are, so I guess that is certainly a highlight for it. But yeah, the Moonlit Grotto, I'm pretty sure you get the Zora Flippers. No, you get the Seed Shooter. Never mind. The Seed Shooter is memorable. So I think the problem here is my memory. And that is why it is definitely above the C and D tier dungeons. The Seed Shooter is just a great Zelda item. It is a great evolution on the bow, and it ricochets, which means that the boss fight is pretty cool, since you can't actually aim directly at the boss fight. You have to shoot the wall in front of you, which doesn't really change that much in the end, but you have to shoot the wall because you can't face it or else it will attack you. So yeah, it's a pretty decent dungeon. I think it's the definition of a B tier dungeon. It's there, it's good, it's square, but it ain't special. So yeah. All right, next we got the Poison Moth dungeon, the third dungeon of Oracle of Seasons. And again, if you ever think I'm going a little too fast or whatever, you can check out those other videos where I go more depth. This is more of, yeah, the room. This is the room of rights of my Oracle of Seasons and Ages ranking. And of course, I will do a 2D Zelda ranking, Zelda dungeon ranking in the future, a 3D Zelda dungeon ranking in the future, and a huge all dungeon ranking in the future. But anyway, let's not get ahead of ourselves, shall we? Next is the Poison Moth dungeon, which is going to go in the C tier, unfortunately. Definitely above Snake's Remains, though. And the thing here about this dungeon is, yeah, it's just a big letdown compared to the Wing dungeon, in my opinion. The problem here is the usage of the Rock's Feather is pretty minimal. It's more just about jumping a couple gaps. There's no unique puzzles or super platforming here. And I will say Seasons does get the Rock Cape later, which is a huge upgrade on the Rock's Feather that Ages does not get. But in terms of which one has the better, so the Rock Cape dungeon does a great job of utilizing that item. So that dungeon will definitely be higher on the list, higher than the Wing dungeon, of course, even. But yeah, I just don't really think that the Poison Moth dungeon does anything too special, and the boss at the end kind of sucks. You just like jump and swing with your sword and it dies like really quick. So overall, it's a really not memorable dungeon, and the problem is it just doesn't utilize the Rock's Feather in nearly as many interesting ways as the Wing dungeon. And if you don't remember, I just say, hey, look up a video of the Wing Dungeon, look up a video of the Poison Moth Dungeon, and just see how many more inventive ways they're able to use the Rock Feather in the Wing Dungeon, and you'll probably end up agreeing with me. If not, though, that's okay. I'm not mad. I'm not mad. All right, anyway, next is the 4th dungeon of Oracle of Ages, which is going to be... oh, what is it called? Oh, the Skull Dungeon. I freaking love the Skull Dungeon. The Skull Dungeon is our first S tier. Not S plus or S plus plus, because I freaking love the dungeons in these games, so I'm going to be obnoxious with the ranking. But yes, I've got the Skull Dungeon. The Skull Dungeon is one of the more interesting ones, because in a game, in Oracle Ages, most of the dungeons are very puzzle focused. Seasons, especially the early dungeons, are mostly combat focused. Although I will say that they even out by the end. I think they're all puzzle focused at the end of Ages and the end of Seasons. So, but early game, there's a lot more puzzles in Ages, and I think that's why the early game Seasons dungeons suffer for me, because they're just more like Zelda 1 dungeons than like, you know, thinking dungeons. But anyway, what's weird about the Skull Dungeon is typically I prefer the more puzzle-based dungeons, but the Skull Dungeon is an action-packed a minecart riding adventure where you're hook-shotting around everywhere with the chain hook. An interesting innovation on the hook shot, where instead of hook-shotting something, you swap with it, which is interesting because it's just weird. It's a different take on the hook shot that I really enjoyed, actually, and I found myself very confused when I went back to Link's Awakening. I played Oracle of Ages right before I played Link's Awakening, and I always try to shoot the hook shot and swap with things. I'm like trying to do this crazy stuff, and nope, that is not how it works in Link's Awakening. But anyway, I think the chain hook is I wouldn't say it's better than the hook shot. It might be. It's different than the hook shot, though. I think they're about on par, but it's just a unique take on the hook shot, which I really like. And overall, this is just an action-packed dungeon. It never relents in pace. You're not ever solving really any puzzles. It's just more of going around and beating things up while you're on a minecart. And usually that's not my type of thing, but the Skull Dungeon just did it so well that, you know, it's an S tier dungeon for me. And it has a great item. So, yeah, good stuff. All right, next we have got the 4th dungeon in Oracle of Seasons, which is maybe good. What is it called again? Okay, looking at my notes. Oh, the Dancing Dragon Dungeon. Yes, the first actually good dungeon in the Oracle of Seasons, whereas the Wing Dungeon and the Moonlit Grotto aren't that bad. The first few dungeons in Oracle of Seasons are painfully bad, in my opinion, and made me almost quit the game, which would have been very unfortunate because I wouldn't be here with you today. Anyway, the Dancing Dragon Dungeon is a solid A tier dungeon, and it's definitely above the Wing Dungeon. The Dancing Dragon Dungeon, what you get here is the slingshot, and it's a pretty good dungeon overall. This one does a way better job of utilizing the rock feather that you get earlier in the game. It does a great job. This is more kind of like the Skull Dungeon, where it's a bit more fast-paced, I think this is the only really good, more combat-feeling dungeon in Seasons. This is one of the ones that I'm like, oh yeah, this is a well done. It does a good job. It has a really good mini boss, a good take on Goma for the final boss. And yeah, I think this is a very solid all-around dungeon. The slingshot is used in some nice ways, even though it is vastly inferior to the seed cannon. It still finds ways to make this dungeon better than the seed cannon dungeon, which we have over in the B tier. So yeah, this is a good dungeon. And yeah, saying that the slingshot dungeon is better than the seed cannon dungeon is shocking me right now. But yeah, I just think that's how it went. The Dancing Dragon dungeon just had a lot of unique rooms, a cool setting, and yeah, all that stuff. I like the Dancing Dragon dungeon a lot. Lots of fun rock feather action, which we unfortunately didn't get much of in the previous Poison Moth dungeon. All right, next we are moving into the 5th dungeon of Oracle Ages, which is the Crown Dungeon. Perhaps the most uncombat dungeon of both these games. There's like 3 enemies in this dungeon, I swear. And you have the Cane of Somaria, I think it's called in this game. I always want to refer to it by the Minish Cap K name. But you build blocks in this dungeon. It feels like you're freaking playing Minecraft a little bit here. Not really, but kind of. And the Crown Dungeon is absolutely fire. I'm going to put it in... No, I'm going to put it in the A tier. Just because I wish there was a bit more of a balance of boss fights. Sorry, not boss fights, enemies. To break up the pace a little bit. To even out the pace a little bit. Even the final boss fight, which I do really enjoy though, is literally a puzzle. Like it's barely even fighting. It's a very, very puzzle focused dungeon. Like if you're being smart, you won't even get hurt during that final boss. It's more of a, how do I actually kill this thing? So anyway, the Crown Dungeon is a great way. It's a great way of yeah, it's just a awesome puzzle dungeon with some great orange and blue switch action. Just, it's a good dungeon all around, and it really does make you think. I wish there was a bit more like quote unquote fun aspects to it. It's more of just like a, I don't know. I feel like it's the Zelda dungeon for old grandmas and their Sudoku type dungeon. So I wish there was a bit more fast paced elements to it. But yeah, I think the Crown Dungeon is still a solid top of the A tier dungeon. All right, next we have got the good old Unicorn's Cave. Yes, the Unicorn's Cave. That's shooting right up into the S+ tier as the 5th dungeon of Oracle Seasons. This is where this game really picks up the pace. Finally starts to come into its own. And this is where it gets super hype with one of the greatest Zelda items of all time, the sweet old magnetic gloves. And sure, these were in 4 swords, but they sucked absolute trash in 4 swords compared to this game. Magnetic gloves were just super cool here, and every dungeon from this point in the game on is just completely benefited by the magnetic gloves and their ability to be in puzzles. So I mean, I just think that every dungeon from now on is just really good in Seasons, but especially just here with the introduction of the magnetic gloves. The boss fight against Digdogger actually slaps, which is funny because that's like the worst boss in the series. But here it's not. It's actually really good. You have to control a metal ball and hit the boss, and the boss is actually super easy. Like, it barely will hurt you as long as you're smart. But you have to be able to use those magnetic gloves so you don't hurt yourself with the iron ball. So it's just a really cool dungeon as a whole. It's just a really fun magnetic glove focused dungeon, and the whole time I was having an absolute blast. One of my favorite 2D Zelda dungeons, one of my favorite Zelda dungeons in general, but not quite S++ tier. That's reserved. S++ tier is like top 5 Zelda dungeons for me, so I'm going to keep that blank for now. Like top 5 overall Zelda dungeons. It's not even just 2D, like overall. Like, that's how much I like some of these dungeons of the Oracle games. Okay, anyway, we're moving into... Oh, speaking of, we're moving into the Mermaid's Cave, which is another S+ tier dungeon, and even above the magnetic gloves one. And this is the weirdest freaking dungeon because you don't even get an item in this dungeon. And I was like having an existential crisis in the other video, and I was like, wait, you don't get an item in this dungeon? No, you don't get an item in this dungeon. You get the Zora Flipper soon before the dungeon, but no, you don't get an item. But the cool part of this dungeon is that it has half the dungeon is set in the present and half is set in the past. So you're constantly like switching between eras, trying to figure out, this is a perfect utilization of the game's main gimmick. And this is a big part of why, while Seasons in theory would be a better game in my opinion, I do prefer Ages because it just uses the time mechanic in way more interesting ways. It shows the world in the past and the present. It shows the world dungeons in the past and the present like this. Whereas the season mechanic is honestly one of my least favorite items in the game. Like, give me the magnetic gloves or the rock cape or the... what's the other item I really like in Seasons? There's another one. I'll get to it later. But, like, honestly, the Rod of Seasons is one of my least favorite items in Seasons. I mean, it's such a cool idea, but it just ended up becoming super easy. And in terms of like narrative and world building, changing the seasons doesn't really do anything for me. And anyway, outside of that tangent, what I'm really trying to say here is the Mermaid's Cave perfectly uses the idea of Ages and makes me respect Ages quite a bit more than Seasons, because especially of how they didn't really. I feel like Seasons had a lot more missed potential than Ages did, whereas I feel like Ages nailed it. Even though Seasons definitely, I would say, had the better premise for a game, Ages delivered better, in my opinion. So anyway, and the Mermaid's Cave is a glowing example of that. And it uses water levels to great effect, which is actually pretty shocking for a Zelda game, because usually the water levels piss me off. But no, they don't. Actually, they don't really piss me off that much. But they annoy me occasionally. Like Zora swimming in Majora's Mask 3DS is awful, and Iron Boots switching in Ocarina of Time can get a bit annoying. But yeah, anyway. And Jabu-Jabu's belly in Ocarina of Time is like F minus dungeon for me. Trash. I hate that place. Anyway, without all that tangent, then yep, we got the Mermaid's Cave. Speaking of my opinion on Oracle Ages, Jabu-Jabu's belly is very different than F minus. But anyway, here we get into the fantastic Explorer's Crypt. Is this wait? No. Ancient Ruins. Ancient Ruins first? Explorer's Crypt. Hey, I'm having an existential midlife crisis here at the ripe age of 17. Let me check. I'm scrolling up through my notes that I took. Lots of notes. Oracle of Ages. Yes? No, this is Seasons. Ancient Ruins is first. Okay, I should have known. I literally beat this game like 2 hours ago. I should know by now, but it's also like 4 a.m. So you know what? That could be a bad effect of this. But anyway, regardless of my stupid life decisions, we have got Ancient Ruins here in the S tier above the Skull Dungeon. The Ancient Ruins is absolutely fantastic. It, again, utilizes the magnetic gloves, which I love. So just a lot more cool magnetic glove uses. And we get the magical boomerang here, which is a boomerang that you can control, which is sick. It's not like it's kind of like Phantom Hourglass or Spirit Tracks boomerang, but you control it just with the stick, and it's just super cool. My only complaint about that is that once you're done controlling the boomerang, lots of times, once you're not acclimated to the boomerang, you'll like walk off a cliff or something on accident afterwards, because you just have to learn how to time the boomerang well. But otherwise, it is very fun to use. The puzzle aspect of the boomerang isn't that great, but the boss fight at the end of this dungeon is like peak Zelda boss. Like absolutely S++ boss design. And it's funny because it's the Manhandler, which is usually like a really mid-tier boss for me. But the way you have to use the magical boomerang as you're going through this quicksand arena, I even have it in the picture here. If you can see that, you probably can't because I can barely see it, and I'm the one squinting in like 3 feet. Not 3 feet, like 3 inches away from the screen. But yeah, anyway, Manhandler here is just so freaking good. That boss, like even if the dungeon sucked, that boss would still shoot it up to the A tier for me. That's how much I enjoyed that boss at the end. So yeah, this is a great dungeon as a whole. So yeah, the Explorer's Crypt, the Ancient Ruins is absolute fire. And yeah, I do think that if the magical boomerang was utilized better in the actual puzzle design instead of just during the boss fight, it would definitely probably make it up here. But as it is, there is some flaws I have with the dungeon, which I cover more in my Oracle of Seasons individual rankings. So if you want to see more about that, go check that video out. And yeah, anyway, so yeah, we've got that. All right, Jabu-Jabu's Belly, my favorite 2D Zelda dungeon of all time. Yep, shocka, but yes, I do adore Jabu-Jabu's Belly in this game. It's way better than the one in Ocarina of Time. I get if people like the one in Ocarina of Time better, I guess, but this is more of like 7D chess thinking. It's not dumb escort mission or anything. It's 7D chess. I swear, this is like the water temple on steroids. Like, you have to be thinking every single move you make. You have to be thinking about the water level rising. And it's confusing as frick because you're in a 2D plane, so you have no idea what floor you're on half the time. But it's just such a cool dungeon, so many great puzzles, and yes, it's confusing as heck, but it's also fulfilling as heck. And it is just one of those dungeons you come out of afterwards and you're like, yep, that is a peak Zelda dungeon. Now, Do I understand why a lot of people would throw it down in the F tier? Yes. This is one of those ones where I know it's to love it or hate it. Like, I can tell right off the bat. Yeah, it's going to be ones, some people are going to hate it, some people are going to love it, but I'm definitely in the camp of loving it. It's just absolutely fantastic. Great, great dungeon. So, yeah, I mean, probably not going to come as a surprise to too many people. Maybe as to some, I don't know. I usually see it either on the top of Oracle of Ages. Not that there's that many people ranking Oracle of Ages dungeons on the internet, but of the few I was able to find in the crevices of the internet, I usually either saw it on top or on bottom. I never really saw it anywhere in between. So I'm definitely one of those guys who absolutely loves this one. And speaking of absolutely loving, I also love the freaking Explorer's Crypt from Seasons, and that's gonna be top S tier. Yeah, it's depending on the day, I might switch this in Ancient Ruins around, but for now, I'm gonna say this one's better because it's later, which means you have the magical boomerang already and you get a new item. I think they're on par, but just because you have one more item in this dungeon, I like it a little better. The boss of this dungeon sucks. The mini boss of Ancient Ruins is bad, and the boss of this one is bad, but this has an amazing boss, and this has a phenomenal mini boss. So, like, yeah. Anyway, so I feel like they're about on par, pretty much. I have the same opinion about them. But the Explorer's Crypt is just a great dungeon. Yes, the boss is underwhelming. It's a copy-paste from Zelda 1 that you can kill in 3 hits with the Biggoron sword or the good old Master Sword. Especially if you have full hearts, you can just sword beam from a distance. But anyway, this is a great dungeon. You get the Rock's Cape, which is so much better than the Rock's Feather. And a big part of why I feel like the end game of Seasons is more fun than Ages, even though it's definitely a less intriguing experience, a less atmospheric experience than Ages, a less like respectable experience. It's more like the Taco Bell to the... I feel like the Oracle of Ages endgame is like authentic Mexican food, and then the Oracle of Seasons endgame is like just Taco Bell at 4 a.m. Like, I think that this is just a less sophisticated endgame, but more fun in some ways. Anyway, that was a weird analogy, but basically, all I'm saying about the Explorer's Crypt is, yeah, you get the Rock's Cape here, and it's absolutely banger. Fantastic item. So glad it made it into my favorite 2D Zelda game, Minish Cap. And yeah, it's just amazing. Love this dungeon. The verticality to it is really cool. Yes, it's a pretty small dungeon by comparison to the dungeons surrounding it. I think it has like half the rooms of the next dungeon and like 10 less than the previous one, which is a little interesting. But yeah, the Explorer's Crypt all around is just a great dungeon. Great time. All right, next we move into the Ancient Tomb, which is absolutely gas, and that is going to be in the S+ tier as well. If you can't tell by now, I absolutely love the dungeons in these games. The Ancient Tomb is awesome because if you can see, maybe I can zoom in. If you can see, there we go. I'm zooming in. There we go. I should have done this earlier. This puzzle room in the middle is why I really love this dungeon. So you have to get 4 different tablets throughout the dungeon, and it's very like open kind of. It feels kind of more like a Divine Beast or something, but like way better with better puzzles and stuff. It kind of feels like a Divine Beast or whatever, where you go just wherever way you want to go as long as you can get the tablets. I know it's a little more railroaded than that, but it feels kind of like that. It's a very expansive dungeon, and once you open that centerpiece that's in the dungeon, it's so satisfying. Also, this dungeon is like, I swear, like 90 rooms. It is huge. It's just an awesome dungeon. And my only big complaint with it, though, is the dungeon item sucks so bad. It is an upgrade to the power bracelet. However, I will say, one of my favorite dungeons from Link's Awakening, the Face Shrine, also did that. So a lot of times, I feel like that those dungeons where it's an upgrade to the power bracelet are some of my favorite dungeons, just because they do something more interesting with it other than just that. But anyway, in the end, I think that the Ancient Tomb is a fantastic Zelda dungeon. And moving into the next dungeon is so good. Again, Jabu-Jabu's belly I respect more from like a game design standpoint and stuff. But the Sword and Shield maze is just, yeah. like I was saying earlier, to me this is like fine dining, Jabu-Jabu's Belly, and Sword and Shield Maze is like hanging out with the boys, doing crappy shiz on the streets, doing fun stuff. Like this is that dungeon for me. It's just so fun. Like both these two dungeons are probably top 3 Zelda dungeons for me. You probably have heard me say this before if you've watched my other Zelda videos, but I am definitely a 2D Zelda guy all day, every day over 3D Zelda. So that is, yeah, these are some of my favorite dungeons for sure. Just so fun. Anyway, Sword and Shield Maze is just fantastic. Outside of the fact that it's a sword and a shield, and that's cool, the dungeon just absolutely slaps. Like, what is the item of this dungeon? I'm gonna be honest. I can't remember. The item is a little underwhelming, if I remember correctly. But that is probably the only bad thing I have about this dungeon. Yeah, it's the hyper slingshot, which allows you to shoot 3 slingshot seeds at a time, which is really, I mean, it's fine, but there's not really any time slingshot's actually like a good weapon in this game. I don't know. I feel like maybe it's because I played it on a linked game, but I already had like the Biggoron sword and the Master Sword and all this stuff. So I was just like, and the Rock Cape just gives you so much like movement that I don't know. I never really found the slingshot useful anyway. But in the end, I mean, the slingshot, hyper slingshot is still a good upgrade. It's still a fun item. But yeah, the item is not too great here. But the everything else is so good. Like the fact that we get a sword and a shield design is awesome. The dungeon just has so many good rooms, like iconic rooms in my opinion. And yeah, just when you think the dungeon's about to be over, it opens up and there's like half the dungeon left. So there's so much good stuff. You feel like you're about to enter the boss room, but you're like, wait, there's a few rooms still left. And then you get this whole thing where there's a centerpiece where you have to throw 4 ice crystals into the depths of Subrosia, and you have to like crystallize the ground so that you can get to the boss room. And it is just an awesome final part of the dungeon. It already was an absolute banger dungeon, and then it just got so much better, and this is just amazing. Yeah, I don't know. I would say Jabu-Jabu's Belly, I just feel like is crazy in a game design standpoint. Like, it's hard enough to beat the dungeon, let alone design the dungeon. So, like, part of me is just like, oh my gosh, Jabu-Jabu's Belly. But when it comes down to, like, just pure, unbridled fun, yeah, this is about peak 2D Zelda dungeon design for me. This and the Eagle's Tower. I just could nerd about this dungeon for a while. But yeah, this was just amazing. Great use of all the previous dungeons, dungeon items. Yeah, the boss fights are pretty mid, but it's fine to me because everything else is so good. Yeah, the boss fights, but one thing I do like about the boss fights is they're just like meat shields. So at this point, it's just testing how good are you at the combat. And yeah, so they're not like gimmicky, like puzzle bosses, but they're still fun. They tank a good amount of damage. So yeah, I think this is just a fun, amazing dungeon. Like, I don't know what expectations I had for it. I heard some people say it's one of like the greatest dungeons of the series, and I was like, okay, whatever. But then yeah, I beat it, and yeah, I can't get enough of this dungeon. I kind of want to go play it again right now. It was that good. All right, now we get to move into some of the worst dungeons. The Hero's Cave and final dungeons in these games are not great. So let's start with the Oracle of Ages. Hero's Cave, yeah, that's going straight in the F tier. I hate that place. It's just so many block puzzles. Like, I think one of the block puzzles, you have to push this thing like 50 times, and I don't even think that's an exaggeration. And it does not use the dungeon items to any interesting effect. I feel like this is just an afterthought. And the reward for the grind fest that it is a stupid ring that literally, yeah, it buffs you, but it also debuffs you. So I was just like, why is this? Yeah, no. But luckily, the Hero's Cave in Seasons is a huge upgrade. Still C tier for me, but still high C tier. It's just a mini dungeon, so that's part of why it's just not as high. But it actually utilizes your items pretty well. Again, it uses the magnetic gloves pretty well. I know I'll just say that every single time, but yeah, it uses the rocks cape pretty good. Yeah, there's definitely some crazy block pushing here, but at least they padded it out with some other stuff too. So yeah, that's good. I'm going to say, yeah, this is definitely a huge upgrade over the Oracle Aegis Heroes Cave, but not amazing. Next, we have the Black Tower, which is absolutely a decent dungeon, B tier. So, Oracle of Ages is all about the puzzles most of the time. All about the thinking. Like, I wouldn't say that Oracle Seasons is even really more combat focused. It's just more breezy and fun. Like I was saying earlier, I'm going to continue to use this stupid Mexican food analogy. The one is like Taco Bell. Seasons is more like Taco Bell. It's easy, more digestible. Well, I don't really know. Not really digestible, if you know what I mean. But yeah, it's just more. I don't know. It's just more like casual, like more fun. Whereas Ages dungeons are more thought provoking and stuff, and just like big braining it up. So that's why. Yeah. Anyway, what I'm trying to say here is that this dungeon feels more like it's out of Seasons, the Black Tower. But what I do love, it's just a lot of enemies scattered all over. It feels like a final, it feels more like a Zelda 1 dungeon, actually, to be honest. There's like one puzzle in the whole dungeon. So that's kind of underwhelming. But I think that it's a great test of Link's combat skill. It's a huge tower. There's lots of rooms. And the Black Tower you visit early in the game. So it's already like obviously set up to be the final dungeon. And it's just a great payoff through the game. I think it's a great dungeon. I'm not going to say that any of the lack of puzzles does definitely bring it down for me. But I also think that the final boss of the Black Tower is not only one, like easily much better than the final boss of Seasons and better than in my opinion, better than both the boss fights in the Room of Rights, but it is also like a top 3 Zelda final boss for me. I just love the final boss against Varen. I think that's the name of the girl. But yeah, just great stuff here. And yeah, if it was actually like any sense of thought provoking or anything like a typical Aegis dungeon, yeah, maybe it'd go an A. But I think B for Black Tower, yeah, that's fair. Also, I like that alliteration. So yeah. Also, yeah, Onyx's castle is a huge step down. Yeah, I think it's a little better than Spirit's Grave, but yeah, that's about as high as I can put it. It is an enormous step down from the Black Tower. This one has about 2 rooms. It's never teased throughout the game. It's hidden in like a random corner of the map. You probably will not even there's no reason you even know. Onyx never even shows up in the game, whereas Varen shows up all the time. So I was just like, what the frick? Everything about this was, yeah, like what I was saying, this game is fun, but in terms of world building and stuff, it definitely is lacking. So I didn't really care about beating this final boss, whereas in Black Tower, it felt like an epic conclusion to the game, whereas in Oracle of Seasons, I was just like, okay, can we move on to the Room of Rights, please? And the final boss itself was actually just kind of bad. Like, it is pretty mid compared to some of the other, or like the Manhandla is probably 12 times better than the final boss. Like, it's underwhelming. The first phase is literally worse than a normal ball and chain soldier. Like, I'm not even joking. Like, it is literally just a ball and chain soldier, but with more health, and it just takes forever, and it's boring. In the second phase, sure, it's this cool dragon thing, but in the end, it's mostly boiled down to jump on a hand, hit the thing in the face, rinse and repeat 47 times. It's just not very fun. I do like that the final boss is like the 2D platformer type thing. I do love myself the 2D platformer type bosses, but it's just such an underwhelming place. There's like 3 rooms, and it just annoyed me. It's just sad to me that this was the conclusion of the game. Granted, it's probably still better than the Windfish's Egg in Link's Awakening, but it's still just a pretty underwhelming final boss fight and a pretty underwhelming place in general. Luckily, the Room of Rights absolutely did not disappoint. Sure, there's even less rooms in this one, but the twin Twin Rova and Ganon fights absolutely slap. So I'm going to put it in low B tier. Yeah, I'll put it right here in the B tier. Not as good as the Moonlit Grotto, and definitely not as good as the Black Tower. But the Twin Rova and Ganon fights are just fantastic. Twin Rova especially. Ganon is actually powerful. One of his moves takes like 6 hearts off you, and that is nothing to laugh about. Like, he also has some crazy moves, Ganon. He has something that swaps your controls, some that stun lock you if you don't do a perfect time jump with the Rock's Cape. Like, he's actually pretty difficult. Like, I literally had to come into the... I didn't have like a medicine, so maybe that was part of my downfall. But I came into the Ganon fight, and I had to fight Twin Rova until I literally had all my hearts left for Ganon. Like, I perfect ran Twin Rova, and then I got to Ganon, and I was able to beat it with half a heart left. Like, I'm talking, this is a pretty difficult boss. To be fair, I wasn't really wearing any good rings because I didn't care enough. Like, I collected so many rings in ages, I was kind of done. When I came to seasons, I was just like, okay, you know what, whatever. But, so maybe that was part of my downfall. But anyway, and yeah, seasons is the one that I actually played for Ganon. So yeah, I had like 1 ring on. So that was depressing. Most of my rings were like Octo Rock rings and all those useless ones. But anyway, yeah, the Ganon fight is very challenging. Is it super fun? Is it like a top tier final boss of the series? Not really, but Twin Rova definitely makes up for it. That's the name, right? Twin Rova. I'm not going crazy. Like Twin Tavia or something, right? I think it's Twin Rova. Okay, yeah. The first phase of Twin Rova is pretty mid. It's just like a worse version of the Ocarina of Time one. That second phase is just so fun. Like, it doesn't even have like too much of a gimmick, but it just, they're a damage sponge, and it's just fun to be. And yeah, I really started liking that Twin Rova fight once I had to beat it. Like, even after beating it like 4 times, okay, like 2 or 3 times to be able to get to Ganon with like full hearts. Yeah, I still really enjoyed the fight that many, even after playing it multiple times. So yeah, I do think that, yeah, this is a great final dungeon. There definitely are much better final dungeons in the series, like much better, like Skyward Sword, way better, or like, you know, even like Breath of the Wild or something. Like, there are definitely better final dungeons in the series. The Room of Rights is nothing to laugh at. I do think it would have been cool though. So cool if you got to get all the items together from, this is my biggest complaint about this, if there was a dungeon where you got to use all the Oracle of Seasons and Ages items, oh, it would be so good. It would be probably my favorite dungeon in the series. Like the magnetic gloves and the cane of Somaria and the seed shooter and the hyper slingshot. Oh, it would be so good. It'd be so fun, but unfortunately. But that would be sick. Now I'm just sad. Actually, you know what? Part of me now wants to put it lower than B tier, but that's not really that fair. But in the B tier, objectively, but at the bottom of F tier, because now I've made myself depressed because that would have been so cool. But anyway, yeah, I'll go B tier with it. Thank you all for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, let me know down below what you thought of the video. If you want a little bit more of an in-depth look about each of these dungeons where I deep dive into the mini boss mechanics, the boss mechanics, and some of the more individual room mechanics for some of the bosses, I will put the seasons, not some bosses, dungeons. I will put the seasons and Oracle individual rankings in the end screen so you can check those ones out. But thank you for joining me in this video. Let me know what you think of these dungeons. Is this one of your, do either of these games have one of your favorite dungeon lineups? For me, Seasons and Ages have some of the greatest dungeons in the series by quite a bit, but that might just be me. So I want to know what you guys think down below, and thank you for checking out this small channel, underrated game on a small channel, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Peace out, RPG fans. Peace out, Zelda fans. Have a fantastic day, or night, or twilight, midday, whatever the heck time it is for you. 7 a.m. 4:30 a.m. like it is for me. Anyway, have a great day.